Wow. y'all. Welcome back to Arab Amp. This is our May edition. My name is Nadia Tonus, and this is our community highlight this month with our Trans Home SF. This is the community highlight that is pairing with a performance by Sharmi Basu, who is a multimedia performance artist, curator, and composer. They create sound and performance pieces that address vulnerability, accountability, and experiences of millennial diasporans through creating narratives of decolonial thinking towards individual and collective liberation, and so much more. They are a certified mediator focused on interpersonal healing within queer and trans BIPOC communities, and they're on the board of a number of amazing organizations, but really the majority of their work is dedicated to providing resources and mutual aid to queer and trans BIPOC communities and folks in the Bay. And so with that and that heart from Sharmi Basu's passion, we wanted to pair their amazing artist highlight with a community highlight that is in the same vein and highlighting the importance of good community-run, led services in the Bay. And so calling in from Ohlone territory, here I am. And today we're joined by Joaquin from our Trans Home SF. And we're so lucky to talk to you today. How are you, Joaquin?
I'm doing good. I'm excited to be here, and it's just nice to hear all this kind of descriptors of Sharmi, who's a dear friend of mine and also an amazing comrade who I actually really received a lot of mutual aid from myself in some of the hardest times I had. So it's very much aligned with the work that I'm doing now. It's just really awesome to hear that connection, hearing a friend's work described in this way, and then now getting to talk about kind of what we're doing. So, yeah.
Yeah, I love that. Well, we can dive in. What is our Trans Home SF? What is your legacy as an organization? And, what's the legacy of the movement that you come from?
Totally. Okay, so this is really good because, with the work that we do is based in housing. So it's, creating supportive services to prevent homelessness or to get people out of homelessness or risk of eviction, things like that. So how the program is set up is that initially it was a 15-room Victorian house in the Mission, which still is, that offered, pretty independent living, rent-free, with food and hygiene supplies and furniture and anything people need for their rooms. And then peer-based, so our staff is all trans identified or gender nonconforming, but predominantly trans women, trans men of color. And so it was a space in which people could, have an opportunity to live rent-free in San Francisco, which is obviously one of the most expensive cities in the world. And then we have the other component, which is the subsidy. So we do subsidize a portion of the rent of about 87 trans and gender nonconforming San Franciscans, most of whom are Black and Latino or people of color. And now we just opened the first trans and gender nonconforming shelter in the country, possibly the world, I'm not sure, but definitely in the country. So making history in big ways, but also very much from the peer-based model. Most of our interviewees, the questions are, have you ever experienced homelessness? What are your understanding of the needs of the trans and gender nonconforming communities that are unhoused, people who are drug users, people of color. And for me specifically, really coming from that decolonial perspective is huge because, there's all these narratives around racial equity and gender equity, but if we don't understand the reasons that those power structures exist in the first place, we're not going to be able to actually make the change that we need to. So definitely being centered in decolonizing and, understanding the Western world and the impacts on marginalized people in this country is really, really a big part of that for sure.
Definitely. Yeah, I really resonate with that. And I think it's powerful that y'all are offering something on a local scale that's also really challenging the structural issues and violence that we're facing and that y'all are facing in particular. I think, can you talk to some of the services that you all currently provide at our Trans Home SF?
Yeah, I think I kind of got more into the services, but I mean, I'd love to also talk more about the legacy a little bit too. But yeah, as far as the services, so we now that we've opened, so we just opened the Navigation Center, which is a long-term shelter, in March, at the beginning of March. So we've only been open like 2 or 3 months. But before that, we had the house and the subsidy, and we found that our program, being one of the only of its kind, was in such high demand that it was really hard to just have to say no to so many people. Just devastating. Who, you know, people would write us saying, you know, they're in really violent situations or they're about to lose their housing, and it was like every week, like emails upon emails, and just it was really taxing on our staff. So when the city came to us to ask for you know, a shelter, which I myself and a couple other transgender nonconforming people I know had worked at a shelter the first year that I got housed in 2020, and really witnessed the violence and the discrimination that not only the staff there faced, but also the people living there. And we actually lost a young transgender nonconforming person who we named the site after. It's called the Taman Bhutan Navigation Center. It's in the Soma. So we were like, absolutely, this is our time. This is our moment. I knew who to call exactly to, you know, get the job done. But that allowed for us to be able to have a ladder program. So people that are on the street, it's 64 beds. And people receive, you know, food, case management, other kind of integrated services like community engagement activities, harm reduction services. We have a food justice coordinator, you know, yeah. And then a team that works with crisis intervention and harm reduction. And yeah, just through the peer-based model, like being able to create relationships with people and create rapport and get to know them individually as people, not just as numbers, and building the relationships with them to understand their stories and what their traumas are and what they actually need to be able to stabilize. And from there, once they have stabilized a bit more, they can apply to being in the house, in which by that point, they will be able to develop skills to kind of live collaboratively with housemates, you know, which when you've been unhoused, it's something as simple as knowing how to, like, getting used to making your bed every day can be a really big task, you know? And so this is a space in which they can kind of go to the next level, moving towards kind of stabilization. And it's, sorry, my cat is attacking me right now. And yeah, so there's that. And so then there's the house, which is really, we try to make it feel as much as like just living with roommates, but, you know, people are required to attend a house meeting once a week, participate in chores. But at that point, they work with, it's 15 rooms, and they work with a case manager just on more light stuff like getting a job or getting your surgeries and establishing care. And then, you know, starting to look into like building credit or learning how to build credit, savings, things that our community were not usually inherited to, like financial literacy and things like that is something they can work on while they live here for a year and a half, and use that time to develop more skills so that by the time they're ready to live on their own, they will have some savings, hopefully, maybe have built up some credit so that when they do graduate onto the subsidy, they're not going to, you know, end up falling through the cracks and back in the street. They're going to actually go out when they're ready and stabilized enough to sustain themselves independently. Because there's a lot of healing that needs to happen in that period of time, right? Between being on the street and being like, there's a lot of pain, psychological and emotional impact on the experience of being unhoused that a lot of people don't really even consider in the process of moving out of homelessness into being housed. And I kind of went through that myself. And it's interesting because actually I stayed on Sharmi's couch a lot of the time when I was unhoused. And I have my own similar story as a trans person. You know, I came to San Francisco from another country and was just like going to figure it out because that was the best option for me. And I was called to do that. And so I did, you know, go through all that myself. And then in a year of being housed, became a director of this, which, you know, a lot of it through opportunity, but because I was housed, I was able to sustain those opportunities and take them on. Whereas when I wasn't, it was just impossible to get anything done. So, you know, it's important for me because I understand and I recently enough, the emotional and psychological, spiritual experience, and the compassion that is needed to actually get people that level of care. But as far as the legacy goes, there was just one more thing I wanted to say, which is that, we're at this moment in history where, when I went through my transition, I met some older trans folks who specifically trans women of color, who really taught me the legacy of like how trans people have survived this long, which is through family and, motherhood, sisterhood, fatherhood, all of that, because so many trans people didn't have support from their families. So initially the culture was, trans people might identify each other just out in the world and end up bringing people under their wing and into their own homes. And now we have this first in history, for the first time ever, that trans people have access to services from the city for themselves. And that's never happened before. I'm the inaugural director of the first trans housing program funded by the city. That's massive to think about. And I think about it all the time because it's just crazy. It's 2022 and trans people have never been included, even though they've always fought for, liberation and LGBT rights and all kinds of other equity rights, but have always been left behind and left out. So it's just kind of like it's our time right now.
Yeah. I think you've spoken a lot to like your methodology of care and like your outlook. It's wild how progress can be made in certain areas that are really central and important for large swaths of our community. But the groundbreaking moments where everybody in the community is empowered. I mean, that's of course the battle that we're involved in. But the fact, I just want to highlight again what you said about it's 2022 and this is the first time that trans folks are getting services from the city. So yeah, thank you for sharing that.
Yeah. As far as like the community care piece goes, I mean, it's still about uncovering the truths that are happening that you don't hear about in the media. For example, that trans women of color continue to be murdered and missing actively all the time. And especially during the pandemic, it was just even harder for a lot of the trans organizations to take care of their people. And a lot of specifically trans women of color did pass away. And, the cops tried to cover it up. It never made the media. There's a lot of erasure of that particular type of genocide that is actively happening, specifically for mostly Black and also Latina trans women. And that's all over the world, actually. But here, I think this gives us a platform to really address that and address the injustice and kind of take up space and giving. Oh my God, sorry, my cat is literally attacking me.
They came to play.
She's a vicious predator. Yeah, but I mean, it's really real. It's really hard. The work that we're doing is really hard, and it's really trauma informed. And now, the beautiful thing about it, though, is we've been able to create employment opportunities for trans people, because a lot of trans people can't even gain employment because they aren't seen even as humans or as the people that they are. And now we have a place that employs almost 50 trans and gender nonconforming people. There's some cis women in this space, but we probably employ a larger number of trans people than probably most nonprofits or places of employment do, I would imagine. We're definitely one of the larger ones, and this is brand new. But at least it's kind of creating this statement that like we need places for our own by and for us at this point in how trans people are understood, in society at large, I
think that was really powerful. I know I keep saying that, but it's the major intervention. And so I think maybe a question to follow up on is like, can you talk more to the political context of this moment and some of the big movement shifts or larger interventions, changes that we're seeing now, and just stay on that thread? There's a lot to learn.
Totally. Yeah, I feel like we are in a moment in which trans people are just a lot more unapologetically being present and seen and standing strong. And, you know, not that that's always been going on. But there is a moment in history especially when I've spoken to a lot of the elders that I know that have said, you know, this has never happened before. You know, even with just things like Pose being on TV and, you know, just a lot more visibility and a lot more opportunity. And we've just really taking every opportunity to come together and be present and be there and have a voice. Even I work with the Office of Transgender Initiatives with the city, and they have the Trans Advisory Committee, which I'm a part of, and we have just been, you know, going to meet with the supervisors and city officials to advocate for more funding and to continue to tell the stories, and continue to kind of ask for a seat at the table. And as a part of that, you know, racial equity really has to be integrated into that, because being, you know, dealing with the intersections of oppression, you know, it's one thing to be a person of color. It's another thing to be a person of color and be trans. It's another thing to be a person of color and be trans and be a woman. You know what I mean? And so it's really important to continue, even within the trans movement, kind of the most marginalized and the most impacted, who are trans women of color predominantly. And so just committing the vision to, you know, invert those power structures is super important in this political moment, and just in the vision, I think, at large also, you know.
Yeah, thanks for sharing that. Well, there's a lot more to say, and I think fundamentally we want people to be able to find you who need to find you, and we want people to also support you. So how do people find you? How do they access your services? How do they support you?
Yeah, so our website is transhomesf.org. I think we are on Instagram. Our handle is at transhomesf. And people can also email our subsidy program, our trans home at stjamesinfirmary.org. If they're looking for inquiry specifically about receiving a subsidy, or if they are a case manager who's working with someone who's unhoused and trans, that's a good place to start for sure. And then we can refer people as needed that way. Yeah, I think also I kind of seem to be the point person for a lot of kind of more partnerships and things like that. So I can also put my email in there as well if you need. Yeah.
Awesome. St. James Infirmary was a jazz song that we used to play. So it's interesting to see it pop up again.
Do you know about the organization?
I do not.
Okay. So I should talk about that also.
Yeah, then. Let's get into it.
So definitely. So our Trans Home is a program of St. James Infirmary, which is as an occupational health clinic by and for sex workers that's been around for 22 years now, I think. And it's a very radical grassroots organization, and you know, has always supported trans people, you know, and just it's that's where the peer-based model was able to happen, because it's the first that is by and for sex workers. So it was, you know, a group of radical sex workers being like, we're traumatized by the medical system. We're tired of being shamed for what we do. We're tired of being misunderstood. So we're just going to have a clinic for and by each other. And from there came a lot of like trainings and cultural competencies for how to serve people in the sex trade, and just empowerment, you know, a lot of empowerment. Like if it wasn't for St. James, I, as a peer, would not have had the opportunity to have the professional development, to have the coaching, to have the opportunity. And so St. James Infirmary partnered with a couple other organizations in the Office of Trans Initiatives to take on this first trans housing program. And the reason that it was able to fit under the mission is because of, as I said, the barriers to employment that trans people face, transgender non-conforming people face, because it's hard to gain employment, and it's actually considered psychological torture to be misgendered. in the workplace or in public places. So a lot of trans people do end up kind of deferring to participating in the sex industry because it's a place in which they can navigate being themselves a lot of the time better, more independently. And whether it's by choice or by survival, some people are forced into it, some people are not. Some people prefer it. So, because St. James already served so many marginalized trans people who were unhoused, it was just able to be a really good way to make a statement that housing is a form of healthcare. So it took on this program, but at this point, St. James is a small organization, very scrappy grassroots. And at this point, the program is about the same size and budget as the entire organization. So it's kind of like you have an arm that's like the same size as your whole body. It's kind of like that's kind of how it feels sometimes. But the values in the model and a lot of the principles and the culture, the work culture that allow this to be successful in the way that it is because of St. James Infirmary, for sure. So it's been amazing. And it's also been amazing because now we have a housing program where we can just direct people directly to our clinic, to our mental health services, to our, medical services, harm reduction, outreach. So it's all right there. And yeah, it's a really important part of San Francisco history too. Actually, I went to see the Harvey Milk documentary because it was his birthday on Sunday, and I think one of his dear friends, or maybe is like wearing a coyote shirt, who was I can't remember what it's an acronym for something, but Margot St. James was the person who started St. James Infirmary. She was a part of Coyote, which was another kind of like group or organization that was like for the rights of sex workers. So there's a lot of history, like old kind of radical history there as well. Yeah.
As you were talking, I just looked it up, and Coyote is, call it a backronym, for call off your old tired ethics.
Right. That's right. Yeah. Call off your old tired. Yes, totally. Yeah. So yeah, pretty cool. It's been really amazing to be a part of something that actually works when you watch so much bureaucracy and kind of nonprofit spaces just replicate the same margins, but kind of it feels like a lot of lip service a lot of the time, the nonprofit industrial complex, because it's working under the same framework. And we still are, but we do a lot of things to try to change that. Like, for example, we raise the floor and lower the ceiling as far as the salary, the wages go, because we understand that being a janitor is a really hard job and it deserves to be paid well, so we raise the floor of what our janitors make to $26.44 an hour, you know what I'm saying? So that the wage gap was a lot closer from, directors to frontline staff. And that was a commitment that we made to just challenging the power structures and the hierarchies of the nonprofit industrial complex and the ways that they continue to perpetuate harm and exploitation to marginalized people. Yeah. My dad was a janitor, so that was really important to me.
It's like the cycles. It's word.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think just thank you for sharing so much today and for visiting and amplifying your work. I think it's really exciting that people who are watching this after they watch Sharmi's offerings and artistic showcase are going to come and see a community highlight and be able to learn about really important history and really important work that's happening now. And hopefully the folks also who need these services and folks who want to be in a community that uplifts and empowers all sectors of our society and all people, particularly those who are on the front lines of the intersections of oppression and violence, like you said, are down to support, down to get involved, and are down to connect. So, thank you.
Yeah, well, I have the chance to. I just want to put out there, we are still new and small and coming with a lot of, barriers to professional development, but working on it. So we definitely are still looking for other kind of funding sources and things like that, sponsorships. So definitely want to put the word out there as well, just to get as much support as we can so we can keep doing and improving the services that are happening for the first time for the most marginalized people. So thanks for the opportunity to have that platform.
Heck yeah. Well, with that, signing off for our May episode, and we'll send all the information, post it, so you know exactly where to find our Trans Home SF, and get more involved also with Sharmi Basu's work. So let's build it, community. We're here to get together. It's springtime going into summer, and we know that the work is every day. So here we are plugging in. See y'all.
Thank you.